Hey everybody, the topic today is putting away all of our toys from the summer season, especially up in our colder climates. It's that time of year where we need to put our toys away and store them for the winter. And there are a couple of things in gasoline-fired engines and in storing them that we need to be thinking about. And we'll start with a story. I've got a 69 Mustang Mach 1 Cobra Jet 428, and I never paid a whole lot of attention to fuel storage over the winter. I would park the car and it would have some preparation, and it was generally set so that I would run it. Even if I couldn't take it out on the road, I'd thoroughly warm it up once a month or so, every few weeks, and that was my way of going through the winter with it. And this is now, that's like 30 years ago. And one spring, early March, I was able to get it out on the road because the salt was gone and it was a nice day. So I took it out for a run. And I very nearly burned the car down. It didn't catch fire, but I wasn't very far away. If you know anything about those old engines, they had the old school Holley carburetors with the large float bowls on the ends. And over the winter, my fuel had gone bad, and the sour gas ate the gaskets up on the float bowl. And so when I fired up the car and the float bowls got filled, it started dribbling fuel out. And when the engine was stone cold, I didn't notice too much. The car had been parked in an unheated shed over the winter, and so didn't notice. But I got a few miles down the road and I got it warmed up, and I could smell gas, and it was running very poorly. I didn't want to idle. Things were not right. And so I opened the hood and saw how much fuel it was running all over the intake manifold. It was leaking that badly. And I very gingerly drove it back the few miles home and got it shut off. I didn't want to get the exhaust manifolds hot and light something off. But that set me on understanding what you need to do with fuel. And there are two things that you need to worry about. One is that the fuel itself ages, it goes bad, it oxidizes. And what you need is a fuel stabilizer. And there are a number of brands out there, and I don't know one is better than the other. My personal preference is Stable. I've used it ever since then in my cars. I don't use it in my daily drivers, but I use it in the Mustang. I use it in the Camaro because it doesn't get driven as frequently as a daily driver. I use it in my boats, I use it in my lawnmowers, I use it in everything. And I'm at the point where if I go buy a 5-gallon can of gas for my small engines, when it comes home, it gets stable in it immediately. Because the gasoline starts to oxidize as soon as it comes out of as soon as it's produced, basically. And in 30, 60, 90 days, you can have a fuel that degrades and causes your engine great harm. Then in the middle of all this, we added ethanol-based fuels. And I'm not necessarily against ethanol-based fuels, but in vehicles that get stored, there's a greater risk. I used to use, when I had a choice in the Mustang, I used to run ethanol-based fuels because they tended to have higher octane. There were days where premium fuel was pretty hard to get in the late 80s. And I never had a problem with the ethanol fuels, other than you really have to watch in storage. And I'll add another story. I had a lawnmower, as an example, that had a large gas tank. It was a rotary push mower, and it had about a 3-quart tank on it. And I let it sit half full through the winter. And in spring I couldn't get it to run. And what I had found was, when I pulled the float bowl on the carburetor, it was full of water, because the fuel had picked up enough moisture over the winter to separate, and the water, being heavier, had worked its way down and had filled the float bowl, and there was no way that engine was going to run until I cleared the water out of it. So you have two things. One is that the gasoline can degrade, and the second one is that the ethanol fuels, if they absorb enough moisture, will stratify. They'll separate, and you'll have a layer of gasoline and a layer of alcohol and water. And that alcohol and water doesn't burn very well. So what do you do about it? Well, first off, I said stable. When you're dealing with ethanol-based fuels, there's another one. Stable has a second product that they call marine grade, and it's particularly for ethanol fuels, and it has additional corrosion inhibitors in it. And this one, I almost don't use the normal stable anymore. I pretty much, my biggest places where I use or need it are boats. The Mustang, which I still have, and it still runs on ethanol-based premium because that's all I can buy. So stable is the thing. And I say there are competitors, but you need a product like this to keep the gasoline from going bad, and then the extra corrosion inhibitors, because when my lawnmower, when the fuel separated, all the parts, the steel parts that held the float together and so forth, were all beginning to corrode. So I have years and years of experience with these products in my personal equipment, and they all work very, very well. At once a time, since I've been in the industry, I talked to one of my fuels and lube engineers and asked him about stable. What was it, and was it a good product? That was when I had first started using it, and he said that it's an antioxidant, and the fuel is oxidizing. You want to prevent that. And he said it's not very expensive. It's only a few pennies a gallon, and he kind of wished that the oil companies would blend it in their gasoline. But the economics of life are, unless somebody recognizes they need it, they aren't willing to pay a few cents more, and the competition, takes that away. So first one is chemical treatment of your gas to make sure that it's stabilized. And if it has ethanol in it, it's better if you have the corrosion inhibitors. Second thing is, if you're running small engines and boats, most of the United States now has alcohol blended in the fuel by law. And some places have exceptions. Usually now the exception is something called rec fuel, REC, rec fuel, and it's usually 89 or 90 octane, and it's alcohol-free gas. And I go out of my way to buy that, and I use it in my small engines, I use it in my boats. The Mustang wants 93 octane, and so I can't buy rec fuel at 93 octane. So the Mustang runs with ethanol-based fuel and a load of stable. And that has served me well now for many, many, many years. I have no problems. I've even had the fuel tank apart on the Mustang, send her out, and I've had a look inside the tank because I was working on other systems in the car. Clean as a whistle, no corrosion, no problems. It works very well. Next one is, if you can't get rec fuel or don't want to use rec fuel, Mercury Marine put out a paper, oh goodness, it must be 10 years ago now. I don't have it at my fingertips. But they did a study. The answer with ethanol-based fuels is either drain the tank as far as you reasonably can, or fill the tank to take the airspace out. The place where you get into trouble, where I mentioned my lawnmower, the place that you get into trouble is that that lawnmower the tank was only half full, so it had an airspace. And so then as things heat and cool, the vapors, air exchanges in and out of the tank. And then that air exchange is what brings that moisture in. So it's better if you have one of the newer cars that has a sealed tank and a charcoal canister, because then you don't get as much moisture moving in and out. But a lot of equipment, small equipment and boats and so forth that aren't as well sealed, and old classic cars, my Mustang's got a vented system. So my strategy is, when it gets to be fall and late fall and I'm not going to be taking it out on the salty roads, the tank gets topped up and it gets filled up. And it spends the winter that way. I mean, there may be time, it may get down a couple of gallons, but I've never had a problem with it separating by keeping it full. And that was Mercury's advice as well, is either empty or full, but not halfway in between, because that's what'll get you into trouble. And regarding wreck fuel, there's an internet site called puregas.org that has a listing of available gas stations that are carrying the fuel, and they carry wreck gas, and they'll give you locations and information on how to find it. So I hope that helps some people. This is really a big deal. It's not that expensive in the long run compared to it's not that expensive compared to what it will cost you to repair things that go bad. As you're putting your toys to bed for the winter, keep these things in mind, and I hope you get your car and your lawnmowers and your boats prepped and put away, and have them so that they'll come out and start up next spring, and you can have fun with them again.